Today, I'm going to walk you through how I make the most simple yet delicious stuffed shells. Very few ingredients needed to get some incredible results, so let's dive in. First off, let me know if you all like this new camera angle. But like I said, you don't need a lot of ingredients to this. I'm going to start with some spinach. You are also going to need some real good jumbo shells. You can get any brand's worth. I like to put the spinach into the filling of the shells. You don't need to do that. You could just stick to it like a cheese dairy based filling. But I'm going to start here just adding a bunch of tablespoons of olive oil into my Dutch oven. Any pan you want to cook this in is also fine. We're going to pour in 1 full bag of spinach. I believe this is about a pound's worth. And we're just going to cook this until it reduces all the way down like spinach always does. This bag will turn into basically a very small looking amount of spinach. And that's the goal. It's going to take maybe 3 to 5 minutes. It won't take a ton of time, but you'll know when it gets there. And once it does, we're just going to pull it out and I'm going to put it onto some paper towels. I like to do that just because the spinach is very wet. It's filled with moisture. And if you throw that into your shells now, they may be a little watery. So if you can, definitely take the time to drain it. I like to just kind of squeeze it together over the sink, and that's all you need to do. You don't need to go crazy with it. Once I do that, though, I like to come in and I like to try and chop this up a little bit. You definitely don't want huge pieces of stem in your stuffed shells or really big chunks of spinach. So just chop it up. I'm going to then throw it into a bowl on top of some paper towels to let it cool down, and that way as it cools, any excess moisture will slowly come out. And I'll move that over to the side and we'll come back to that shortly. I'm going to serve these shells in a very simple tomato sauce. So we're going to come in and we're going to chop up this onion, same way you would always dice it. Try to get it as fine as possible. Some people like to cook this into like a ragu or like a white ragu. Whatever you want to serve with your sauces is totally fine. So just sub that in for whatever sauce I'm using. Try to make sure your onion pieces are not too big though. We're not cooking it for a long period of time, so they won't really dissolve fully. But we're going to start that process now. Little more olive oil than you use for the spinach into that same Dutch oven. I just wiped out that excess spinach liquid. Now we're going to throw in those onions and we're going to sweat them out real nice for 3 to 5 minutes. I'm going to come in and season them a little bit at this point as well, help them pull out a little bit of that moisture. Once you start to see them getting kind of warm and starting to turn translucent, we're going to throw in 3 cloves of garlic that I'm just going to let cook down for maybe a minute or two until it becomes really sort of fragrant. You don't need to cook this for a long amount of time because we will let the sauce cook a little bit, just not long enough to really break down the onions, but just mix that garlic all up in there. And then at that point, I'm going to throw in some meat. You don't need to do this. You can make this a completely tomato-based sauce. You can make it an all meat-based sauce, but I'm just going to throw in some ground beef, let it brown, and then mix it together with the onions and garlic and add 1 tablespoon of tomato paste. You can add a little more if you want. We're going to mix this until it becomes that signature kind of rusty color. That's how you know you've cooked out some of that bitterness and rawness of the tomato paste. And then I'm going to add in 1 full can. It's about 16 ounces worth of just crushed tomatoes. Use whatever tomatoes you want. If you have a homemade sauce, go ahead and throw that in. Then we're going to also add about half a can's worth of water just so it has a little something to cook down. But we're going to mix that together and I'm going to leave this just kind of simmering for about 20 or 30 minutes while I do everything else. And at that point, it'll be ready for your shells. I also like to cook the shells at this point. I'm going to cook them for about 7 or 8 minutes and then I like to take them out and let them cool down. So do this enough in advance that you'll have time to let them cool. This is what they'll look like after those 7 or 8 minutes. You could tell they're flexible, but they're not floppy and falling apart as if they were fully cooked, and that's exactly what you want. It'll hold the filling, but they won't break. Now let's start assembling that filling. It's very easy. You're going to take the spinach that is cooled down. You're going to add somewhere between 8 and 16 ounces of ricotta, depending on how many shells you need to stuff. We're going to add in around 4 to 8 ounces of mozzarella, depending on how much you want to fill. Adjust this fully after you make it 1 or 2 times and know what you really like. And then I'm going to just kind of grate in a little bit of parm. You can do any other type of cheese you want here. It doesn't really matter. If you want to add some meat also in, you could also do that. I'm going to mix this all together until it is nice and well mixed. And then at that point, I'm going to add in 1 egg. That egg you use to kind of bind everything together, and it'll make sure that your filling inside of your egg kind of sets. I've tried it without the egg before, and it does get a little bit runny. So I do definitely recommend using the egg. I know it seems strange, but trust me, it works. And once you get that fully mixed, I'm going to throw this into a piping bag. See, that's what you're looking for right there. It won't fall off the spoon. It's not liquidy. You could just fill it with a spoon directly into the shells if that's what you're into. I think the piping bag makes it a little easier to control. I'm not great with them, so I do kind of make a mess of this entire situation. I do recommend, if you haven't really used the piping bags before, like I don't have a ton of experience with them, maybe stick to the spoon. But I'm going to throw that in the fridge until we're ready to do everything else. And now we're going to start to assemble. I have the sauce here that's reduced a little bit. It's not nearly as liquidy. It should be deep enough to just basically cover 80% of that shell. If you want a little less, that's totally fine. I'm going to cut off a very small amount of this piping bag. If you cut too big of a hole, it will be kind of hard to control it. And then we're going to go ahead and just fill these. They're going to want to hold themselves shut, so it's difficult to really hold them open and fill it. Even harder with a spoon sometimes, I think, which is why I like the piping bag, because you can easily get it in there into the smallest opening and fill it. And just fill it however much you can. If you overfill it, it's not an issue. If you underfill it, it's not an issue. These are a very forgiving, food. That's exactly what I'm looking for right there. Try to shut it a little bit if you can, and then we're just going to fill up this entire Dutch oven. Fit in as many as you can. If they're too close together, it doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to coat it with some parm before we throw this into the oven. But just, if you want to put a little mozzarella on right now, you can. I do it at the halfway point, but that's all you need to do. They're very simple, very forgiving. Put that lid on. We're going to throw this into the oven at 425 degrees. And we're going to cook it for 15 minutes. Once we pull those out, you'll see that they are starting to get cooked, but there's not really any browning. They're not really doing much besides just kind of bubbling and steaming in there. So at this point, I'm going to sprinkle on a little extra mozzarella just so at the end there's a nice pull of some nice cheese. And then once you do that, we're going to put it back in the oven completely uncovered for another 15-20 minutes, same temperature, and then you're going to be good to go. Once we pull these out, you can see that they really cook nicely. Don't worry about the burnt sauce around the edge. That's totally fine. You can see the cheese is melted. The shells have started to cook a little bit. If you want them a little more crispy, leave them in there for another couple minutes. But now it's just time to plate these up. I think the easiest way to do this is just grab kind of a large spoon and go in and grab them. Don't use tongs or anything like that. They'll break. You just want to kind of easily grab underneath them, pull them out. And that is exactly what you're looking for. They're steaming hot, but they're not falling apart. The insides have not liquefied and kind of spilt out all over the place. They held their shape, their form. Everything looks great. Once you get the first two out, you're able to kind of grab some of that meat sauce also that's sitting kind of underneath. The meat has kind of sunk under those shells. And I think a good 3 to 5 is a portion if you're not serving it with anything else. If it's kind of like an appetizer, maybe 1 or 2. Coat that with a little extra cheese. If you want to put a little mozzarella on there and throw it under the broiler, that's also totally fine. But look at that. So easy. These are so forgiving, guys. Trust me. You really can't screw these up, and you could adapt them in so many different ways. But I think the most important part is, how does it taste? I would definitely recommend a sharp knife for these. Otherwise, you'll just kind of squish them. But look at that. The inside, it doesn't run out. It could be liquidy and just kind of flow everywhere. But if you do it right, it'll hold its form like that. And these are just absolutely delicious. The shells will fully cook. They'll get a little bit of crisp on them. They'll be everything you want them to be. Definitely recommend making these. You will absolutely love them. Trust me.